my topic now. I actually I want to start with a poem, and this will circle back around at the very end, but I kind of want to set the mood. And so I'm going to start off with this poem. And this is What's in the Wind. What's there in the wind? A hush that moves the trees, blowing light, scattering sunlight through trembling leaves, each glimmer a secret only the heart can read. What's hidden there, yet somehow revealed, so plain and still a mystery? How is it that my heart, quiet in my chest, is out there too, dancing in the breeze, shining through the trees? What kind of magic slipped into the air, and how is it you're the one who placed it there? What wonder moves like this so gently, so completely? Who taught the wind to love me this way? I wonder who slipped this love into my heart so quietly, so completely, and left me only the feeling. Who taught my heart to love like this? It wasn't me. But I love as if it always was. I love and love and love. So today, I really want to discuss with all of you in regards to fulfillment is emotions. What are emotions? What is emotional trauma? How do we deal with our emotions? Because I've talked about this many times, emotions can be some of the greatest distractions from the truth. It can be the greatest upheaval, the greatest distortion of peace and value and worth and happiness in our lives. So, why do they do that? Where do they come from? What are they? What's their nature? And why do they do this to us? And how do we deal with that? How do we navigate our lives going through such emotions? And so, in order to talk about that, we need to understand that our spirit is always communicating to us in the same way that our body communicates to us. Now, our body is telling the mind something about, whatever's going on with our digestion, with our energy, with, our fatigue, all these different things you see. The body is always communicating and telling the mind something, whether we're able to properly understand what that message is or not. There's always a message being sent to the brain and the mind that's conveying something to us, that's telling us there's a problem or telling us that there's a situation, right, it's telling us that circulation has cut off somewhere. It's always telling us when there's pain, that there's a problem. There's always the body communicating and conveying something to our minds. Well, in a similar way, so does our spirit. Our spirit also communicates to us, and we receive this information through our minds, right? You could say our mind is the meeting point. Our mind is where we really reflect and are able to come to a point in our awareness where we can perceive and see and feel and understand. That's the nature of the mind that I'm talking about, not just the brain, but the mind, our perception. So here, a human is the mind, body, and spirit. The body and spirit talk to the mind. When it communicates to the body, right, the body says, things like pain, tiredness, fatigue, sufferings, mood swings, inability to focus, lack of enthusiasm and motivation, right? Just like what I was talking about before. It's always communicating and saying something to the mind. And these are the ways that it communicates. Now, the communication of the spirit communicates a little bit differently. The experience is a little bit different. It's feeling lost, loneliness, purposelessness, boredom, sadness, hopelessness, emotional trauma, lack of motivation and enthusiasm, right? Suicidal tendencies. You can imagine this list goes on and on and on. I'm sure all of you know the kinds of things that are on both of these lists because you've experienced both of them. But as Guruji has said, most of the reason why all of us are here is not necessarily because of the communication of our body or the issues with our body. It's the issues at the level of our spirits. Our spirit is suffering and it's trying to tell us something. It's trying to communicate to our minds. And when our spirit is not functioning, right, it's not at its peak, it's not, supported by the grace of God or by this divine light, this divine energy, right? We experience these. They're either a call from the soul, right, to return to source, to return to the truth, or it's just a cry out for help, right? A cry out for pain. It's in a state of illusion, right? And it's so enchanted by, the stories of our lives and our identities that we get confused and caught up in the confusion. And as a result, we face these repercussions of that, right? The pain of the spirit and its inability to properly express itself, to properly, you know, thrive in its nature. I'll give you an example. There's someone, one of our clients who's around us who experienced a lot of physical pain throughout her life, a lot of physical problems and a lot of physical pain. And she actually came to Guruji for one of those reasons, right? She was suffering a lot physically, and she experienced incredible miracles on a physical level with her body. But what ended up happening is this was a recent, moment for her where because of this constant suffering, right? There was this idea that, you can't be happy while you're suffering physically, that the two of them can't go together, that you can't still enjoy your life and physically suffer. That's how bad her pain was, that she couldn't enjoy her life. She couldn't find peace. She couldn't be happy. She couldn't have anything else. If she was tired, it ruined her mood, right? If there's something else wrong, it just, destroyed her current state of mind and awareness and all peace in life. Everything was lost. And she recently had an experience where she was going through incredible pain, right, for like a week or two. And she said, the strangest thing is happening. She's like, I'm able to push through it, not because, it's like I have less pain, but it's like, I'm just happy. I feel good. Even though I'm in pain, it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't affect me because I just feel good. I feel happy. I feel at peace. I feel content. That is the power of the spirit when it's finally functioning in your life. I mean, the spirit is capable of even dissolving physical problems, right? This is God we're talking about. God can do anything. But even in the midst of that suffering from the body, right, the true level of contentment, despite any other situation, despite all life circumstances, despite everything else, the thing that can still get you out of bed, put a smile on your face, and make you laugh and cry with joy, despite anything else going on in your life, can only come from the spirit. When the spirit is functioning, when the spirit is the leader, when the spirit is optimized, when the soul is empowered. And that is why all of you are here. You are not here for any other reason. You may experience benefits as a result of that in all other areas of your lives. But the primary reason you are here, the destiny that all of you have, right? It's not a coincidence that you are here, as opposed to the rest of the population, as opposed to all the other billions of people that exist on this planet. You are the ones on this call today. For some people that seek purpose and destiny, I can't think of a clearer indication than that. Now, the problem that often arises, right? We see the symptoms, the side effects of spiritual dissatisfaction, when the spirit is trying to communicate and tell us something. Now, a lot of the time, this gets distorted. We're unable to properly see this or address it. And that's when I want to get into the nature of the emotional aspect of our lives, the emotional, the thought forms that we have, because that is perhaps the sole cause of our inability to properly understand what our spirits are telling us. When I'm talking about that poem, that's what I mean when I'm saying your spirit is in full presence with the moment. You are sitting with your soul, you are sitting with your spirit, watching nature, living your life. That is the kind of peace and love and bliss that you experience just being. But to get to that point of transparency where we're able to be fully transparent to our spirits and feel it and fully express it, there's a process we have to go through called resensitization. We need to learn how to feel again and how to feel again properly. Now, there's a big problem that occurs with a lot of, spirituality, modern day spirituality, and a lot of it is actually very toxic. It's become very contrary to the true nature of, who we are as a species, as humans, as divine beings, as, spirits and souls. And a lot of it goes into the nature of either suppressing your emotions, right? Emotional repression and suppression. And a lot of that is disguised in the form of positive thinking, where no, 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 you don't want to feel that. That's a bad feeling. You need to think positively, even though it's a real feeling. Your emotions, they are conveyors of truth, right? Abstract truth, maybe a form of truth, but truth nonetheless, a truth that says something about you and what you think and what you feel and who you are and what you believe. They're tailored for you. And to deny that is to deny yourself. It's like you're fragmenting, you're disconnecting, you're removing a part of yourself, and you need all of yourself. You need the entirety of your being. Enlightenment is union, it's wholeness, it's completion, not fragmentation and separation and denial and suppression and repression. It's about feeling again. In fact, it's about feeling more than you've ever felt before in your life. A lot of people think that they need to feel less, and that is so contrary to the truth. It's more about what we feel, how we feel it, and what we do with those feelings. Now, what exactly are emotions? If you look at an emotion, right, think when you're feeling a really intense emotion, maybe extreme grief, right? When you're just bawling your eyes out, when you're absolutely exhausted from feeling that emotion. And then compare it with another emotion. Let's say, you're really excited or you fell in love with somebody, right? Whether it's real love or not, it's just the excitement, the honeymoon phase. You have this ecstatic feeling. You have this huge amount of energy coursing through you. It's like you might have been exhausted from work that day, and then suddenly you get a phone call, and it's your crush or someone that you really like, someone that you're really interested in. And suddenly they say, "Hey, I'm ready to meet with you now. Do you want to meet?" And you're like, "Absolutely." You're like, "Forget about the exhaustion and everything I was feeling before. I'm ready. Let's do this." Suddenly you're revitalized. You're full of energy, all just from emotions. So you see, emotions have the power to either drain you to degrade your vitality, to degrade your quality of life. Science sees this in the psychosomatic problems that we face, right? Science definitely sees a relationship between our emotions, our minds, and our physical health. When we suppress too much, when there's too much going on with us emotionally, it actually manifests as a physical problem, a physical disorder, or physical pain, even. It depletes us, it leaves us with nothing, not even the mental faculties to work through it, or to think clearly, or to see life clearly, to make decisions, appropriate decisions, correct decisions. So, what does that tell us about the nature of emotions? It's that emotions, they're energy. They're the vital energies of our being, intricately woven through our nurturing and our life experiences. But that's all emotions really are. That's their source, we could say, is that they're the energies that's derived from our spirit, our soul, our life force energy. Right? You've heard the saying, are we our awareness or are we our thoughts? It's because there's this distinct idea that there is an energy, right, that emanates from our spirit, from our consciousness itself, right? That excludes or even lives past or beyond even our emotions and our thoughts, right? The witness, our existence, our true existence. And when we get tied down by certain emotions through our life experiences, right, this starts to distort that pure awareness, that pure consciousness. It acts as a filter that, as a result, right, depending on the type of filter we have from our life experiences, from our traumas, from our nurturing, right, it can either further degrade our experience of life or it can enhance it. So emotions are just an expression, an energetic expression of consciousness itself. Now, why do our emotions get twisted? Why do they get caught up in perception? Why do we get confused? Why do we not see things so clearly? Well, I given you the example of that diamond with the ice around it, right? Where the diamond is your soul, right? Your spirit. And as a result, you get this layer of ice over you. And this ice is simply just past experiences. It's like a sludge, it's a coating that slowly desensitizes you from being able to properly feel your soul and its expression. And as a result, we get even misguided information. We get incorrect information in our minds. We think it's coming from our soul. And the origin is, right? It's our soul crying out for help, but it becomes distorted from lower levels of consciousness. And this lower level of consciousness is just this ice, right? That's so rigid and so complete and so thick that it just blocks out your ability to feel anything at all. It blocks anything from coming through. It blocks out divine grace from your life, right? The involution of consciousness. It blocks out everything. And that's what we call the ego, because those layers form an identity, form a given reality. It forms our lives. right? If your life, you see life as suffering, that's your identity, that's your life, that's your ego, that's your expression of consciousness, is one of suffering and frustration and turmoil. The nature of it is not correct, but from a lower level of consciousness, that's where this energy degrades into. And as a result, because of the structure around that diamond, you actually have less energy. There's less that's able to emanate and flow through you. You actually have less divine grace working in your life. You have less consciousness, less energy, less of that vital life force that keeps you alive. And in higher forms, higher levels of consciousness allows you to thrive. If you can open up the next slide. So, a little explanation, right? When I talk about like nurturing our past life experiences, there's another terminology that you hear in like Hinduism and Buddhism and everything. And that's called the Vasanas and the samskaras, right? This is just another way of talking about that diamond with that coating around it. So when we talk about vasanas and samskaras, we are referring to subtle patterns that shape and structure consciousness, almost like filters or frameworks that condition pure, formless awareness into habitual tendencies, thoughts, reactions, and behaviors. Samskaras are subtle impressions left on the mind field, the chitta, by past experiences, thoughts, emotions, and actions. Vasanas are more like webs, the latent tendencies or inherited inclinations born from accumulated samskaras. While samskaras are individual bricks, vasanas are the blueprint that organizes them into recurring patterns like fear of intimacy, striving for control, or tendencies toward anger or self doubt. So, in philosophy, vasanas pull pure awareness into movement, desire, thought, reaction. They create the illusion of me acting in the world. When one evolves in consciousness, the samskaras are burned, or we could say karmically dissolved, like that ice melting. And that happens through awareness, through grace, and tapas, which is another way of saying discipline. Vasanas are transcended or neutralized, so they no longer dictate action. Consciousness frees itself from structure and becomes luminous, spontaneous, and unbound. In this state, the being acts not from conditioning, but from divine will or pure presence. So when we talk about emotional expression, right? The emotions, they're very reactionary. And I've talked about this before, how a great indication whether you're responding from your spirit or your ego, right? Whether your spirit is in control or your ego is in control, there's a very easy way to tell. And that one way is saying, am I reacting? Am I having a reaction? Right? When someone says something, right, do you get upset by it? Does it frustrate you? Does it, make you angry? Does it make you, desire something? Right? Any reaction is a reaction, and that's from ego, good or bad, both. The spirit comes from a place of stillness. It's not pulled by desire. That is what so many people try and talk about when they're trying to talk about mindfulness. It's being unmoved by the reactions of the mind and the emotions in the moment they're happening. It's the ability to sit as a witness to your own mind, to your own thoughts and emotions, to be able to see them, understand, evaluate them, right? Consider them, see the truth behind them. Now, when these samskaras, right, this structure of consciousness is so rigid and formed, it's very difficult for us to be able to be a witness. And that's where a divine enlightened teacher comes into play. You have grace that comes through. This divine energy, this light, this grace, right? It's like that dissolution, right? That karmic layer from those samskaras, that ice, it's burned away. It can be burned away directly, right, through a direct interaction with the light. Either that's through your own doing, through your own purity and your own innocence, or that's through the grace of another person who's already connected, who has enough to share with everyone. On a small level, you can kind of get a little bit of that from somebody who's maybe just from a higher level of consciousness than you are. Right? That's why it's so important to associate with people that are of higher levels of consciousness, preferably even higher than our own. Because what happens is we slowly start to see that veil from the samskaras and the vasanas start to lift. They start to peel back. They dissolve for a moment because we start to get a glimpse at something else that we were mistaken by, that we didn't see clearly. We get a little bit of that through our associations with people who come from higher levels of consciousness, but we get that on an extreme level with an enlightened teacher who is radiating that pure fire that is capable of dissolving anything. Now, the unfortunate thing that happens with a lot of people, and this is why Gurji talks about the difference between benefits and transformation, is people forget about the discipline that's required. Right? If we go back to the slide, there are three qualities that are required. One of them, pure grace. Yes, you can use a lot with grace. You can benefit infinitely. But when the source of that grace is gone, what do? Do you go back to your old latent tendencies? Guruji says, be aware, right? Take inventory, assess ourselves, right? That is being the witness. That is not judging per se, because judging comes with a huge emotional connotation that kind of puts you back in the vices of desire, right? And prevents you from being able to properly self reflect. You need to be able to look at yourself like a third party. That is the silent witness, that is the awareness. And that usually only comes when your consciousness is free enough from the bounds of the samskaras and the vasanas. So it's like you get a little bit of a glimpse. When your consciousness is raised, it evolves, then you see that this structure peels away, and then you see what's behind it for a moment. It becomes transparent. You become sensitized to your spirit and your soul, and you feel something that you haven't felt before, or maybe not for a long time, maybe not since childhood. You'll notice something that through nurturing, through our experiences of life, right, we often go two different ways. Right? You see a lot of people in their childhood, they're full of life and vitality. They're excited. They're just, beams of energy, full of imagination and hope, right? Inspiration. You see that life force when it's unbound, right? And free flowing, easiest from childhood. And then you see the nature of these samskaras and vasanas start to take root through our experiences of life, right? And then when we get involved in our emotions and we don't go through them or process them, and we don't have the discipline and the awareness on what to do, how to react, how to respond, right? To align them with our spirit instead of our egoic desires, then as a result, we end up just reinforcing these samskaras and vasanas. We actually just reinforce them instead of dissolving them. And so, as we reinforce them through habitual past experiences, and you see this in the neurobiology of the brain, right? Those neural pathways when they start to form from infancy into early adulthood, and then after a while they stop, right? And then we start pruning away the things that aren't necessary, right? We start blocking out, right? We start to fragment. We start to only connect with a fragmentation of reality instead of the whole of it. We can no longer see that joy. We can't see that vibrancy or that vitality in life. We can't see that light, that divine energy, that divine presence, this ecstatic state of being, this bliss, this contentment with life, this hope, this purpose. Children, ironically, they feel full of purpose. They don't know what they want to do with their lives yet. They don't know what direction they want to go, and they have no idea. You ask them, some of them are like, I want to be the president. You ask someone else, I want to be a horse. They have no idea what they want in their lives. Some of them want to be animals, things that can never happen. But they're not worried. They're not focused on it. They're not concerned. They're not right trying to, be a horse. They're not trying to be that thing. They're just living their lives contently from one moment to the next. They're never concerned with purpose. Only the ego is concerned with purpose. What am I doing? Why am I here? And then we live in a society that disregards the nature of the soul or the spirit altogether. You have to go to religion or someplace, and a lot of people who are spiritual are on the spiritual path, or maybe are just spiritually natured, but are more agnostic because they see the flaws in religion. They see the limits of faith and belief. They see the outcomes or lack thereof of rituals and dogmas, and they feel lost and confused in this world. And that's a lot of people. And there's no source, there's no organization, there's no government, there's no society, there's no, lead in our lives. There's no form or source of nurturing or form of education or form of reinforcement, to keep this part of ourselves alive, to keep ourselves sensitized to our spirits, because we disregard it altogether. And so people will always follow the narrative of what they know or think they know, right? We've been told by many other people this is the purpose of life, or the life purpose, what we're meant to do, right? We even have an idea on a spiritual path of what our purpose is, right? We start, at the moment we got on a spiritual path, we start envisioning ourselves as enlightened already and what that means. And that means we shouldn't behave this way and we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. And that's not right either. So I completely disagree with all the people that say you are your own guru. It's accurate to a limited sense. Once you're connected to your soul, once you're connected to your spirit, then you can receive that inner, then you can understand the way your spirit, your soul talks to you and follow that wisdom. You can follow that guidance. You can redirect and reorient your lives in accordance with that spirit, that soul. But most people think that it's their soul talking to them. They think that it's their spirit, but you wouldn't have all those problems when you go back to that list, right? How the spirit communicates to us. You wouldn't have all of those problems, right? That lack of inspiration from that slide, VB. Lack of motivation, boredom, apathy. You wouldn't have all of those problems in your life if you were connected and following your spirit. It's truly grace that pulls you out of that. Spirit communication, feeling lost, loneliness, purposelessness, boredom, sadness, hopelessness, emotional trauma, lack of motivation and enthusiasm, suicidal tendencies. Right? We're talking about severe emotional turmoil. Right? It was like Viktor Frankl. You see the epidemic that everybody's facing in this day and age. Viktor Frankl says it wasn't people living in a concentration camp; it was people who felt bored. He says that was the greatest suffering and perhaps the greatest dissonance between us and our spirits, the greatest disconnection between us and purpose. That is the greatest indication of our inability to connect with our spirits, is when we feel bored. When we feel a sense of purposelessness. Not that we don't have a purpose, but when we feel purposeless. When we feel lonely, when we feel lost. When we feel lonely, we look for another person in our lives. We look for a solution outside. There's no one who's taught us where to look. And any institutions that tell you that there's another way, another path, right? They don't have the science, so people can't rely on it. They don't feel like they can rely on faith. It's just theory. And there are many people talking theoretically these days, as if they know. When I'm talking about returning to a state of purity in your being, right? Your true nature beyond the emotions. The emotions, they're not bad. They can lead to bad things, but inherently, emotions, they're neutral forces in our lives. The actual force behind emotions, where we end up taking the emotion in our experiences and our consciousness, that's what either ends up degrading our energy, our life force, or ends up purifying it and evolving it. And that's whether it's aligned with our ego, our desires, our fantasies, or when it's aligned with our soul. And when I'm talking about emotions being purified, right, this is the process of sensitization, higher consciousness, purity. Sensitization, it's feeling again. Desensitized is like when you're sitting, in a room that you always sit in and you was sitting there all day, right? After a while, you slowly start to, lose the ability to hear the ambient noises around you, right? Like the hum of a computer or the blow of the AC, right? You become desensitized. It's like you're eating a lot of sugar, and after a while, the impact of the sugar isn't there anymore, not when you first tasted that sugar, right? There's a level of satiation, but with that satiation comes a level of desensitization, right? When you have somebody who's like, works in sensory testing, right? They have palate cleansers. So you can properly taste or smell something or feel something again, because without that cleanser in between, right, we become desensitized. We can't properly distinguish between one taste and another. We can't tell the quality of the ingredients, the quality of the flavor or the smell. We lose our ability to perceive and understand quality. You have a bite of something sweet, you have a bite of something salty. Or you smelling perfume, they have coffee grounds, right? That you smell in between different perfumes, because after a while they all start to smell the same. Well, this is what consciousness does. When consciousness turns into a grosser form because of those layers, right? That structure around it that starts to form through all of our life experiences, what ends up happening is we become desensitized. So to evolve and grow in consciousness means that on this path, we are becoming resensitized. We are learning to feel again. And part of that, there's a learning curve. We need to realize what we're feeling, from who we're feeling it from. Is it a feeling that's coming from our spirit, or is it a feeling that's coming from our misguided emotions? What are we feeling? It's like in that poem, if you look at just the trees blowing in the wind and the, sunlight, it's like, do you have that experience of this wonder and awe and beauty and love? Have you become desensitized to that? You can stand in front of Niagara Falls and not feel anything because your emotions and your life path, your life experiences have desensitized you. They've stopped you from feeling. And that's a very dangerous place to be, because when you lack feeling, you also lack awareness. You lack awareness of the ways that you're losing energy, of the ways and things that are harming you, right? When you see someone who's gained their sensitivity back, right, you might think that they're full of drama, right? They smell things, they hear things, they see things, right? They're like, stop talking, I can't focus if you're talking, right? All these different things. And you're like, they're full of, or they're eating something and they're sensitive to what they're eating for the first time. They start getting symptoms of allergies or things like that that were never there before, maybe. And what's really happening is it's not that, right? It's like these feelings just started, or it's these things are new things that started happening recently. They were always there, they were always happening. Becoming resensitized means for the first time, we're experiencing what is always there, what is subtly influencing and controlling and guiding our lives. But we've been so far receded in terms of our awareness and our consciousness that we have lost the ability to perceive it and understand the intricacies of the nature of consciousness and energy and the occult wonders that work over our lives. So, the process of dealing with these emotions is the process of purifying them. And what I mean by purifying them, I don't mean by like throwing rubbing alcohol at it. We're talking about taking something and reorienting it. Because we have to understand that these emotions, they're telling us something. They're conveyed to us by our spirit, and they're emanations where they turn into, right, in terms of our emotions, what they get skewed as, what they get misconstrued as, how they distort our perception, how they create a reaction within us, is itself a messenger of truth. They tell us something about our nature. They tell us something. They tell us where we're misguided. When we're having an emotional reaction, when we're having an experience like this, instead of letting the emotion take you into chaos like a hurricane or a tornado, right? We reorient it. We focus on the divine nature of it, what it's conveying to us. We align it with the divine principles and fundamentals of God and act in accordance with those. You end up seeing these emotions when they are aligned with the higher self. It's not that the emotion itself disappears, right? If you have grief, it's not that grief suddenly disappears. What ends up happening is in the light and the presence of divine, when you surrender this emotion to your spirit, to God, you see this emotion, this grief, gets transmuted. Grief turns into something like compassion and love, empathy. Rage turns into forces of change. Anger turns into the strength of being able to walk away. These impure qualities of emotions, right? Those are the emotions I'm talking about, like rage, right? Anger, guilt, shame, or things, right? Those are important. They are important messengers, but what's important is to transmute them into something useful. Allow them to speak to you, to tell you something. Allow yourself to feel them, but go into the truth of what the message is. Through this grace, through this energy, you have more awareness, because more awareness just means more energy. So you have the ability to perceive and discern now. You have the ability to stand back, or at least reflect back. I was explaining to someone, because they have a tendency to lose control. They are very emotionally unstable and they react very poorly, often with screaming or anger. And they have valid reasons. To them, it's very valid. They've gone through a lot, they're in significant pain. But when you follow, right, the path, right, of these latent tendencies, these latent characters that have come from these samskaras, right, these past experiences, when you follow the path the emotion takes you, instead of working on transmuting it, what ends up happening is they just reinforce. They get stronger, their hold of you gets stronger. You even see this with people who are here, who are with Guruji. You end up seeing, like some of our clients, people who can't seem to get it. They're stuck in the same cycle or the same pattern again and again and again, and they can't seem to get out of it. They're struggling with the same partner or the same husband or the same wife, right? And they're stuck in a situation and they can't seem to escape it. And they've been doing this for years. And we have to understand that the nature of energy itself, of power, of awareness, right? Awareness is a neutral territory. It's very neutral. When you have power, when you have energy, right? Imagine a jetpack, right? Whatever direction you're pointed in your life, you turn on the jetpack, you're going to go in that direction. You're going to reinforce what's already there. Grace will lift you out of it, but if there's no inner work, if there's no discipline, if there's no implementation, if there's no following the divine principles and fundamentals, sacrificing your emotions or your desires or your fantasies, making higher choices that are aligned with the nature of the soul and the spirit, that follow what you know is inherently good for you instead of following just another desire. You lead your life with compassion, with sacrifice, with understanding, lack of judgment, with empathy, love. You use your emotions to allow them to point you to the places where you need more love, where you need more compassion. You accept the teaching of your emotions. Accept it with gratitude, not suppression and force, with gratitude. Be grateful that your spirit is showing you what you still need to work on. So I was telling this woman, I was saying what you need to do, right? Because she was always fighting with her husband constantly, all the time. And I said, right, it's gotten so out of control, you don't even know when it's happening. You're only able to look at it after the fact when it's happened. You're only able to reflect on it afterwards. Well, that's where you start with reflection. Chintan, as Guruji says. You reflect, you look back, you make an assessment, you make an evaluation. In this way, sometimes that's where guilt and shame have its purpose, have its role to tell you that you did something wrong so you can be motivated to do something different, to improve, to change, to purify yourself. Instead of following those same patterns that make you and other people miserable. But look at it with gratitude as a teaching, because we get to a point where we start to shrivel in on our emotions because we linger on them far too long, but not in the appropriate way of transmuting or using them, but in a way of just festering. We allow them to fester and take control and take over our lives, further degrading our ability to perceive and understand and appreciate life and see life. If there's anything that's easy for this divine energy, for this light to transform, it's emotional trauma. That is the easiest thing and one of the first things to go if you're ready for it. But a lot of people, it's like a drug because they lack that sensitivity. They can't understand and comprehend where real energy, where real vitality comes from. They have this skewed, right, energetic aspect of their being, which they get from emotions. Right? You get a little pseudo power from drama and manipulation. You get a little bit of pseudo energy from this. You get a little bit of from that. So you need a little bit of an experience outside of that in order to understand and resensitize yourself to the fact that, oh my God, There's something way better than even what I'm doing. I can actually enjoy my life even more than having to manipulate and control other people. Who knew? Who knew I could actually enjoy my life more? I thought I was enjoying that. Right? The emotions intoxicate you. They like another way of saying Vasana is lust. There are latent tendencies. They're what we're drawn to. They're what pulls us in beyond our control, right? It's a desire, it's a movement, it's a force. So you can understand that when there's no discipline, how just a huge amount of power in our lives can either completely derail us, can cause more suffering, can cause more problems in our life, more mental chatter than ever before. You'll get a quick benefit and then suddenly you're back to the same story, but now it feels worse. So when you're being controlled by your emotions and you have no ability to take that control back, you don't have that level of consciousness yet, you don't have that level of awareness, right? You need more grace in your life, but you also need to be able to free up those energetic patterns within yourself because they're restricting, right, that vital force, the flow of that vital force, which gives you the ability to perceive and use your will to make changes happen. So I was telling her, you reflect. You look back on what you did. You see how you feel about it. Did it feel right? Right? Don't ask if it was justified. Don't just ask, did it feel right? You go back into your feeling. You call upon your soul to help you see the truth. You align with your soul. You talk to your soul. You talk to God. You speak with God. You say, show me, was I in the right? The greatest way to see that is to see, do you feel exhausted? Do you feel drained? Are you miserable afterwards? Or do you feel good? Do you feel full of energy? Do you feel vitality? Do you feel peace and contentment? Or do you feel the opposite? That's showing you if your emotions, right, are degrading your life force or evolving and enhancing it. So then what do? You make amends, you rectify, you make things right. Right? When you make a mistake, the best way to feel good again is to correct the mistake. When you weren't in the right, you apologize, right? You crash someone's car, you help them get a new car. You don't just walk away and drop off the keys, right? You slowly start to make amends. You start to make correct decisions. And when you have a teacher, an enlightened teacher, right, you have the teaching, you have the foundation of understanding what those correct actions, those correct decisions to make are. And the more you follow them, meaning the more you're aligned with your soul and your spirit, right, the more you'll find an inner contentment stays with you. You feel more at peace with yourself. And as a result, you feel more energy, you feel more vitality. But there's another thing that happens as well. You're starting to loosen, right, those latent tendencies, that samskaras and vasanas. You start to dissolve that ice around the diamond. You're feeling again. You're feeling that what it truly means to feel. You're feeling good, right? You're no longer requiring these lower forms of emotions, right? These lower degraded forms of energy in order to give you a sense of energy or vitality in your life, to give you a sense of purpose, or to give you something when you are feeling bored, right? When your spirit is in disharmony with your being and your current way of life, right? And then we use our emotions to try and fight back with that. And so when you actually follow these divine principles and fundamentals, it's quite simple. It's Guruji's just saying, be a good human being. But sometimes people need to be told what to do. I mean, in the Bible, you had, Moses, who literally had to write the 10 Commandments to tell people what not to do and what to do. Like, don't kill people. Stop stealing each other's crap. Stop doing that. He literally had to tell people what to do. He had to explain to people what was good and what wasn't. And the more they did that, the more energy freed up within their consciousness and their beings. And the more they actually felt the outcome, the subtle energetic differences in making a right decision versus a wrong decision. That starts by following with faith. You start off with faith, with trust. You use the enlightened teacher as your surrogate for your own spirit and your own soul. The enlightened teacher communicates, guides you to the right path, and you follow that. And what happens if you follow truthfully and honestly and sincerely with devotion, you start to see a new awareness, a quiet, subtle awareness starts to increase and envelop and grow within you. And this awareness gets stronger and stronger the more you tune into it, the more you pay attention, and the more you align with it. So no longer are you just dependent upon the teacher, but you start to also develop your own small reservoir of energy through your own inner work, your own discipline, your own guidance. You start to wake up. So you start to make decisions based upon that. So you're freeing up more and more energy in your life. And as a result, you're gaining this sensitivity. And this sensitivity is power. It's the power of change and transmutation. It's the power of capacity. It's the power of possibility. It's the power of infinite potential. People think sensitivity is a weakness. And when it's taken hostage by your emotions and the people around you, it can become weak. It can pull you down because it's the greatest connection we have to life itself. It fuels us, it's what keeps us alive. It directs us, it tells us what to do. When this sensitivity becomes stronger and stronger, you're able to make decisions and do things that go against the grain of society. You're able to make decisions and implement things in your life that go against what everybody else is telling you around you not to do. Or when somebody's telling you what to do. You become the person that when you hear another story, right? There's a story they told in my psychology class about this woman who was, in front of an apartment complex full of people who were home and hearing everything that was happening. And she was in the middle of getting raped and assaulted. And she was begging for help from anybody to call the police, anything. She was crying and screaming for help. And not a single person called the police. Not a single person helped. Not because they're all, though you could say that's very like behavior, but those people might be thinking they're good people. What ended up happening is they thought someone else would call the police. Surely someone else is taking care of this. I don't have to. Someone else will do it. Surely, out of everybody in this apartment, somebody's called the police by now. Everybody thought the exact same thing. That's coming from a very low place in consciousness. Low places in consciousness is not just about intending bad things to happen. It's also this lack of power to do something and make a decision that's for the greatest good, to implement and do something that's right, to recognize what's right. That's also coming from extremely low consciousness. The fact that this woman suffered needlessly when there were so many people around to help her speaks volumes. Consciousness doesn't allow suffering to happen in your life or the lives of others. Its nature is freedom and joy and happiness. And when you're in tune, when you're resensitized to that, you don't even have a choice anymore. It's no longer like, oh, should I do this or should I not? I know it's the right thing to do, but I feel like I'll get a lot of repercussions from society, or oh, it's a lot of effort, or oh, I have to do a lot to be able to do that. When you evolve and reach a certain point in consciousness, you don't have a choice anymore. You are compelled. People look at these people like they're very courageous or they're very powerful or they're very, whatever word you could possibly use. They just have a magnetism and you think that they are very dynamic. They make those decisions that are hard and they push through and they're able to do it. When you reach a certain place in consciousness, there's no pushing through. There's a certain equilibrium you reach within your being, this contentment, this place of peace and stillness that doesn't really give you a choice anymore. You're compelled. You just do what's right because it's right. You don't consider the alternatives. You don't consider the motive. You don't consider other intentions. You don't really consider all those other things because you already know what's right. And you are so swayed by that part of yourself that tells you this is the right thing to do. And it's not coming from a place of desire. There's no personal means to an end for whatever you're doing. There's no trophy at the end. There's no recognition. There's no appreciation. There's no nothing for you at the end. But you feel compelled and satisfied enough to do the right thing because it's right. That's purity. That's innocence. These people are not courageous. They're not strong. They're not powerful. They are power. They are strength. They don't need to call forth their power, strength to do something. They just simply do it. You can imagine these people must be very humble too, living in a state of humility because there's no part of themselves that said, I was afraid, but I made myself do it. And now I feel great. There's no making yourself do anything at that point. It's beyond you. You get nothing from it. So your sensitivity, people think sensitivity means weakness oftentimes because we associate sensitivity with emotions. And when emotions are out of our control, we can become very weak. We can become disempowered. But the nature of sensitivity is the nature of power itself. To be able to gain and perceive power and strength, to be able to recognize it and do something with it, comes only through sensitivity. I'll give you some examples from the Bible. This is perhaps one of the most powerful and simplest lines in the Bible. From John 11:35, Jesus wept. Do any of you know the origin of this quote, of this passage? Write it in the chat if you know. Then we have Galatians. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. Ezekiel, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from your heart of from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Yes. The line Jesus wept came from the story of Lazarus. If any of you are familiar with the Bible, the story of Lazarus, right? He was the brother of Martha and Mary. And at that time, Jesus was traveling outside somewhere, and he received news from Martha and Mary that Lazarus was in very poor health, gravely ill. And of course, Mary and Martha, they're, disciples of Jesus. So they knew, the power of Jesus and what he was capable of doing. So they were beseeching him. They're calling out to him. They're like, he might die. You need to come back. And Jesus said, everything's fine. Don't worry. No, he said, essentially, that the outcome of whatever Lazarus's illness was is that he would not be dead, that he would be fine. Everything would be okay in the end. And then they found out not too long after that that Lazarus ended up dying. And it was when Jesus heard the news, he told to his disciples that were with him at the time, he said, you know, again, everything will be all right. It's, for your benefit that I wasn't there because will, see the glory of God, the power of God, the capabilities of what God can do. You'll see the divine presence through me. And so he waited a couple days, even in no rush to go back. And so by the time he ended up traveling and got back to, Martha and Mary, a whole crowd was there. They were all mourning, and it was 4 days passing since his death. And I think the first person that came up to him was Martha, and she was weeping, and she said to him, you know, Lazarus died because if you were here, you would have been able to give him life. You would have been able to, transform his sickness, his illness, and make him right again. But she said, knowing that you are a man of God, that you are, divine, I know that, God will fulfill whatever your wishes, your desires are. So I have faith in whatever, you want will happen. And then the next person who came to him was Mary. And Mary, so emotional and weeping for Lazarus's death. And he saw everybody around him who was grieving so much pain. And he broke down and wept with them, even knowing in the next moment he would raise Lazarus from the dead. He still cried and wept with them. Strength. Because from that compassion, from that love, came that grace, came the power to change and do something, came the power to bring Lazarus back from the dead, came endless compassion and love. So sensitivity comes with equal power to make change and do anything. In the same way, that sensitivity from Jesus, when they went to his grave and they said, "It's been 4 days. I don't know if we should roll back the stone. The stench, the odor might be so foul. We shouldn't open the grave." And he said, "No worries, let's open it." And so they rolled back the stone. And he said out loud, essentially, he's like, "God, you know me. You already know me. You know my faith in you. We already have, this relationship, this established bond, but this is for the sake of those around me to hear me beseeching you, you know, for the sake of everybody else to witness this miracle." He prayed to God and said, "Lazarus, step out." And Lazarus, still wearing his clothes from the grave, stepped out alive. But the power in that sentiment that Jesus wept, knowing the outcome, knowing what he was going to do, knowing the power of God, knowing what was going to happen next. That's power. That's strength. Because it's that sensitivity that allowed him and persuaded him to perform that miracle in the first place. It's the transmutation of those emotions from grief to love, grief to compassion. In its pure form, these energies of emotions can empower us. When we go back to the other quotes, the fruit of the Spirit. Go back. This quote from Galatians: the fruit of the Spirit is love. The fruit of the Spirit is joy, it's peace, it's forbearance, it's kindness, it's goodness, it's faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. When we're in communion, when we're one with the Spirit, when it's our spirit that's leading us, when our spirit is activated, when our spirit is empowered, these are not things that we need to control and bring and assimilate, that we need to suppress and focus on the positive. This has nothing to do with that. The fruit, the leftovers, what comes from the Spirit inherently on its own, that is its nature. The Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, a living, breathing heart, something that lives and breathes and is full of vitality and movement, feeling. We're talking about feeling, regained sensitivity. When our consciousness evolves, these dormant faculties of the spirit. They awaken within us. They reside with the spirit and they awaken within us. And as a result, our body becomes more transparent to our consciousness. Our body, our emotions, right? They kind of recede. They become purified. In the same way, when you see the evolution and its impact on the body, you see the effect of these kinds of emotions, this spirit, on our nervous system. When we no longer are reactionary, when we're coming from a place of spirit instead of our ego, our emotions, or our desires, what we see is a calming effect on the nervous system. We see that these pathways, these nervous system pathways within the body, they start to clear up. They become purified. As our emotions purified, so does our nervous system and the channels of our nervous system. They also purify. And as a result, we become more conducive to these other currents that exist within us. And that's the currents of the spirit, the currents of sensitivity. We feel again. We become aware again. You could say we become more receptive to the currents of the divine. It takes strength to live in this world and to find the truth, to go against what so many people think is right versus what you know is right. It takes an incredible amount of strength. It takes a lot of strength to be able to let go. It takes a lot of strength to be able to push people away or to walk away. It takes strength to say no. It takes strength to say yes. It takes strength to do just about every single thing on this planet, in this life. It takes strength some days to get up in the morning and brush your teeth. It takes strength some days to even crawl into bed. I wrote this earlier and I want to read it to you. Spiritual evolution is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming fully conscious in your body, mind, and soul. As the layers of ego, trauma, and societal doling fall away, you feel more deeply. You perceive more honestly. You become less tolerant of falseness, violence, or unnatural things. Not out of judgment, but incompatibility. This is often why spiritually evolved people avoid harsh environments, violent media, processed foods. people of lower consciousness. It's because they are no longer numb to their subtle energetic impact on their lives. But true strength doesn't come from hardening, it comes from opening. As consciousness rises, we don't become immune to life, we become intimate with it. Sensitivity is no longer a wound, it becomes a refined power. You begin to feel more, not less, with stability, clarity, and presence. What once overwhelmed you, you now meet with awareness. What once bypassed your notice, you now feel in your bones. You sense truth before it's spoken. You feel dissonance before it becomes damage. You are no longer dulled, you are awake. Strength is to stay open in a chaotic world, to care when it's easier to disconnect, to walk away from what disturbs your inner harmony, not from fear, but from inner power. Becoming sensitive is not a regression into fragility. It is a return to authenticity, where your perception sharpens, your intuition deepens, and your nervous system aligns with a higher intelligence. You are not weak for feeling more. You are strong because you no longer have to numb what you know. Like Jesus wept, right? He was the embodiment of divine power at that time. But his emotional sensitivity, it didn't weaken his power, it didn't lessen his strength, it revealed it. It made itself known to himself and to others. So, dealing with emotional trauma, it's not about repression, suppression, ignoring, blocking away. It's about taking an emotion, taking that truth, taking something that has become disfigured by the samskaras and vasanas of your life. Taking this deep rooted trauma, pain, anger, frustration, sadness, hopelessness, confusion, whatever it is, and offering it to God. The greater the emotion, the greater the offering to God, the greater the power in it. To recognize the emotion is strength. To surrender it is even more strength. To reorient ourselves when guilt and shame, things like that, are just fueled by more guilt and more shame, it does nothing to perpetuate or to allow us to grow in consciousness. But when it's reoriented, when it's redirected, when these dormant energies within us that are confined by our emotions, they're confined by the structure of consciousness, gets reoriented, redirected into the light of divine, guilt and shame turns into something like perseverance to do the right thing. Stuck in your own same tendencies and patterns, guilt and shame perpetuates guilt and shame. It continues. If your emotions are not evolving, they're perpetuating themselves. They're living out the same play in your mind again and again and again. You are not actually doing anything to evolve or transmute or transform them. You're not aligning yourself with the divine, with your spirit. You are stuck in an identity, in a story of your life. You are stuck in a lust, in a clinging, in a desire, a fulfillment of a fantasy that you're telling yourself. You're telling yourself life is painful because you're vindictive, you feel good saying it because it's justice. Instead of saying, I've been in pain and it just makes me long for you even more, God. I'm willing to let go and surrender this pain, even though I get a certain sick satisfaction from feeling it. A lot of times when we feel pain, we feel satisfied with it. And it's that whole story that consciousness likes to keep things as they are. In the same way, the mind is inherently lazy. It doesn't like to put in more effort into things. It likes to simplify and makes things easier to maintain where it's currently at. Not to evolve, not to digress, not to do anything else, just to maintain itself. You see, everything in life works to maintain itself, to stay wherever it's at. Even when you have children, you're perpetuating more of you. You start to see children follow similar tendencies parents do. That's the nature of this world and of life, is to continue. It's to perpetuate. It's cyclic. And the point is to break the cycle, to reorient ourselves, to break away from our desires, to sacrifice, and to look for true fulfillment, to look to transmute, to change these emotions. Emotions don't disappear, they transmute because emotions are those vital energies. It's just the movement of energy within you, given a certain structure of consciousness, gives you a different experience of how that energy moves through you. Sometimes it moves through you in spite and hate and anger, sometimes in peace and love and joy, sometimes in excitement, sometimes in desire. They're all energy. The source of emotions are all neutral. It's a matter of directing it, orienting it, transmuting it. Knowing that its source is just pure energy, then you know that you're not stuck or defined or helpless with an emotion. You do not have to maintain or continue that emotion. It's not something that you can't get rid of. It's not something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. It's something that, of its own nature, has no quality to it, meaning you can transmute it and change it to anything you want, given the awareness, grace, and discipline to do so. So, everybody that's been on this path long enough, and when I'm telling you emotions are some of the easiest things for this grace and this light to change, and if you're still struggling with the burden of your emotions, then it means there's something you're not doing. There's something maybe you've persuaded yourself or you think you're doing, but you're not. You are not in alignment with your spirit. You're not listening. You're not sensitized to it. You're not feeling. You are suppressing or ignoring. You are not feeling. You are not going to the root of the emotion, feeling what it's telling you, what you perceive, what you feel, going to the root of your identity, going to the root of your sensitivity, and learning to feel again. When you first start feeling again, the first thing you feel usually is pain. But it's because, not because the pain just started. Like I've said many times, it's that the pain has always been there. You're just no longer numb to it anymore. You've opened yourself up to an old wound and now you can treat it. Now you can take care of it and deal with it. With that awareness of that pain comes the ability to change it. And through grace, through this divine grace, you can. You really can. And just like with anything that requires effort and will, it's always harder to conceive of it and think of it than it is to do it. Once you make a decision, there's a point in your life where you decide to change, to do something different, to let go, to finally connect, to reorient yourself, to reprioritize, to refocus the energies of your life. That's when changes happen. And the moment you make that decision, you are empowered. A freedom of awareness starts to flow through you, and you suddenly become revitalized and re energized as these structures, these samskaras and vasanas start to loosen up, to let go once you start to make conscious decisions on your part to improve, to change, to do better. Not for glory, not for pain, but for God, for love. I want to go back to that poem. This poem is very meaningful to me because I wrote it. No. No, this poem came to me when I was in a very beautiful meditation. And in the middle of it, just something pierced my heart and it pulled me out of it and told me to write. And it all just came within 30 seconds. It just flowed together and came together just like that. But for me, this was my first experience. I mean, it started a long time ago, this experience that I'm writing about, where this beautiful bliss and sensitivity pierced my heart. And I looked around me outside and I saw the trees blowing in the wind and the sunlight scattered through the leaves. And I saw what felt like an ocean of stillness and silence everywhere. There wasn't a single thing it didn't touch that wasn't entrapped or entranced by it. It felt like everything was underwater. Felt like time had stilled and stopped. And this was my first experience of it. So in writing about it, I wanted to share it with you in hopes that you might feel even a little bit of it. The ecstasy of the experience, the grace and the beauty behind it, the vulnerability and the sense of helplessness, but the sense of being enamored by that helplessness. That fragility and sensitivity, but that strength that comes from it, the strength to feel, the strength to have no doubt, the strength to rely on something so strongly, become so confident and so sure, to make a decision without second guessing yourself. When misery is all that surrounds you, to smile and laugh and be in joy. So I want to read it to you one more time. What's in the wind? What's there in the wind? A hush that moves the trees, blowing light, scattering sunlight through trembling leaves, each glimmer a secret that only the heart can read. What's hidden there, yet somehow revealed, so plain and still a mystery? How is it that my heart, quiet in my chest, is out there too, dancing in the breeze, shining through the trees? What kind of magic slipped into the air, and how is it you're the one who placed it there? What wonder moves like this, so gently, so completely? Who taught the wind to love me this way? I wonder who slipped this love into my heart so quietly, so completely, and left me only the feeling. Who taught my heart to love like this? It wasn't me. But I love as if it always was. I love and love and love. Feeling is not a weakness. It's how the soul breathes through the human form. But it must be paired with discipline, like wind guided by the sail or fire held in a lamp. Emotion is divine when it flows through the vessel of an awakened being. That's what all true yogis, saints, and sages embody. Not less emotion, but mastered emotion, radiant with presence. That's what this poem is. It's that radiant presence, the peak of emotion. That's the glory of God. That's purpose. That's fulfillment. That's power. That's love. That's strength. That's every desire fulfilled and no desire left. That's all questions answered and no questions to ask. I don't know what you want in your life, or what you yearn for, or what you look for. But the first time I felt that was the first time I realized that everything I went through, all the pain that I pushed through, that I surrendered to God, all the discipline, all the strength, all the power in my being, all the sacrifices, every tear I wept, everything that I experienced in my entire life was worth it and felt so complete in that moment that they all paled by comparison. That in that moment there was justice, in that moment there was validation, there was presence, there was everything made complete and whole. And you experience that again and again and again until it never leaves you. You are that radiant presence that you're never lonely, you're never alone, you're never bored, you're never sad. There's no more longing, there's nothing, there's no more purposelessness. That sensitivity, that presence strips you bare and leaves you with nothing and everything all at the same time. So trust me when I say there's nothing you want more than that. But sometimes to get to that point, we need to journey through life. We need to experience our desires. We need to let go. We need to experience our desires to realize how unfulfilling they actually are. We need to experience life. And sometimes that's fine too. But I guarantee you that there is no greater purpose than that moment when you finally experience it. Even if you never experience it again, you finally feel content, like it's all been worth it.